We used a partitioning scheme, but we were unaware of the license implications. And yes, the partitioning option is a separately licensed option, even if you have Enterprise Edition. Is it possible to unpartition a table without taking a huge outage to do it? And now I thought this is a fairly odd question, because the most common requirement of it nowadays is, as data gets bigger and bigger, is you have tables that just get ridiculously sized and you think they're hard to manage and we need to partition it. But this is one of those awkward things, and once again, don't shoot the messenger. I don't make the licensing decisions inside Oracle organization, but yes, it is one of those things that sometimes people do get caught out with. The standard demo that I've been spruiking for the last, well, probably since 12.2, when this feature was introduced, was this one. We have a table with some indexes on it, and it's, what is it? We got 20 copies there of DBA objects. I've got a couple of indexes on it. They're obviously indexes across the whole table because this table's not partitioned. Putting my salesman hat on, I would say, look how awesomely cool this is with one line command. The first thing, I just do an alter table modify. I want to take that table and now make it into a partitioned table. And by the way, I'd like to compress one of those partitions as well. I'd also like to change the indexes. One of them will become local. One of them will become global. In fact, this one's globally partitioned on a different partitioning scheme. I could put them in different table spaces if I wanted to. I could even only pick up a subset of the rows if I wanted to archive some of the data at the same time. I can do all that stuff, and I just add the online keyword, and with all that complexity, it just works. The online data migration facilities in Oracle 12.2, even more so in 18, more so in 19, etc., continue to blow my mind to this day. I do a talk where I have 3 slides, say, please stop taking outages because they're almost never needed anymore. The question is, can we exploit this kind of technology in reverse? Because in the documentation, there is nothing that says you can run that alter table modify command and have no partitioning clauses. You can't do it. It's not supported. But let's see how we can exploit some of these facilities to actually move toward a non-partition system with a minimal amount of outage. So I'm going to start with a partitioned table. I'm being a bit lazy here. I'm simply going to create a list partition table using the owner column and using the automatic list partitioning that came in, I think in 12.2 or 18. So effectively, we don't have to list all the partitions. I can actually see that if I just pick out the first 10 partitions, you can see the database automatically assigned names for them. And there's one partition for each distinct owner, which is stored in the high value area. So here I have a partitioned table. The question is, how can I take it such that it's just back to one table with a minimum of outage? So I create a couple of indexes on the object name and the object ID. So just to make it a bit more complicated. Now, what am I going to do? We've got 87,000 rows across my entire partition table. So at the end of this exercise, I'm hoping to have 87,000 rows in one table. So as I said, one of the things that we can do in the Oracle database is go from one partition system to another. So what I've opted to do here is, what I'll do is I'll do that same alter table modify command, partition by list, but what I'll do is I say, I want you to convert it to a table that only has a single partition. And to make sure that every single piece of data falls on that one partition, I've called it everything, we use the values default, which means anything which doesn't fall into a nominated partition, in which case there are none here, it must always fall into the default partition. And at the same time, I can say I want to update those indexes at the same time. And I want them to be local. Now, local is a bit of a misnomer here because I'm saying I want these partitions to be local to this single partition table. So yes, they are local indexes. They are bound to at partition level, but we're only going to have one partition at the end of this exercise anyway. So it's really the same as an index across all of the data. But as I said before, when you're going from one partitioning system to another, you can do that and do it online. And it's a small table. It ran very, very quickly. Now we can see we have a table with a single partition which consists of all the data. I've collapsed it from 50, 40 partitions into one partition. It's still a partitioned table. However, the next thing we can do is take advantage of exchange partition. And way back in 12.2, we created the syntax of create table for exchange, which creates a table called T1, which is an exact replica in structure with the table called T. And now put the indexes on there as well. So they are now also global indexes on this table. So now I have a partition, which consists of a couple of local indexes, and I have a table, which is identical in structure to that partition with a couple of global indexes, and I can simply exchange them and include the indexes as well. So now I've taken my one partition and swapped it with a standalone table, thus leaving my standalone table as my unpartitioned table with all 87,000 rows in it, and the partition table is now empty. So there we have it. We can actually convert in a couple of steps a partition table into a non-partition table simply by exploiting the ability to change partitions. We change to one and then we use exchange to get to none. Both those things would actually be minimal in terms of outage. The exchange will take a lot, but it's going to be very, very brief. So it can be done using the existing facilities. Perhaps not what they were intended to do, but it can be done.
Okay, quick interruption to this video to give you some great news. Although it's not in the documentation and not yet supported yet, very soon we will have a feature which is a native unpartition. You'll simply do an alter table and say convert it to a non-partition table, and as soon as we can get it in the documentation, it'll be available for you to use. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, if I had my way, partitioning would be just part of the product, but as I said, I don't walk in those circles. But one thing I would recommend is partitioning, I think, is always going to be worth the money as long as you can really exploit it well. If you just think, oh, I'll go buy a partitioning license and then maybe partition one or two tables and just do it because they got large. There are all sorts of ways you can exploit partitioning in terms of partition pruning, making backups faster because some partitions might become read-only, putting some partitions into the in-memory column store for performance improvements, compressing old partitions. The more you can take advantage of the fact that you've broken up a big object into smaller objects, then I think you actually will get the return on the investment for that license fee.